All right, folks, we're back with more questions from you, our listeners, for the second part of our third episode of Ask Us Anything. Now, we've got four more questions that we are going to tear through today. The first one's about building relationships with today's athletes. It seems more important than ever, but it seems also harder than ever with athletes not being with us as many years as they may have been in the past. So what's the key thing we need to know about an athlete and building a relationship? The second question we're unpacking is just when developing a player-led program, right? We often, we want a lot of feedback. We want them to share what's going on for them. But what do we do when it feels like it's becoming too much feedback, right? And they might be, too critical, and it starts to maybe even rattle our confidence. The third big thing we're going to unpack is, and there's a lot of talk about this in this podcast, and there sure as heck is a lot of talk about this on social media with influencers, which is self-care, right? I mean, there's so much stuff out there about how to live well and how to live to 150 years of age, I feel like at this point, but we're all coaches, right? And so what do coaches do? How do we take care of ourselves in season? So we're going to unpack a little bit about that. And then lastly, we're going to share something ourselves that we've changed our mind on. We got that question as well, like what's something that we've changed our mind on? So those are the things we're going to be unpacking today. So buckle up and let's get going here. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast, where we're dedicated to helping you unlock your leadership potential and create winning team environments. My name is JP Nurbin, and I'm joined today by my incredible co-hosts, Betsy and Nate Sanderson. Each week, we bring you practical tips and strategies to elevate your coaching. For more, explore our online courses and books at tocculture.com and betsybutterick.com. And be sure to subscribe to our weekly newsletter at tocculture.com for weekly culture building insights, as well as the notes to this and every episode of the podcast.
Question that we have here is, what are the most important things to get to know about an athlete in order to coach them effectively and have a good relationship? And I think this question is interesting in part because there could be two separate questions. What's the most important thing to know about an athlete to coach them effectively? And then a separate question, and to have a good relationship. Sometimes, at least from the outside, being really effective with an athlete might not also check the boxes for what people initially think of when they talk about a good relationship. And I think about UConn women's basketball just winning the national championship. And, there was that meme on social media where Paige Beckers or walking off the court and hugs Gino. And, they asked Gino what he said to her. And he said, "I love you." And she said, "I told him I hate him." So there's a lot of dynamics at play here. For me, when it comes to effectively coaching someone, it is a commitment to curiosity. So the most important thing in order to effectively coach an individual and to create a great relationship is a commitment to curiosity. What's working, what's not working in my attempts to coach that individual? Am I being intentional about asking relative to the athlete's previous experience, their previous experience with coaches, their previous experience in their sport, their experience with their parents? Like, am I spending time getting to know who they are as a person in addition to how I can effectively coach them? And is there reciprocity? Because with shared understanding, that gives us a long runway for progress. But if I'm making judgments or I don't know, and I'm trying certain things and I'm doubling down on those efforts when I'm met with resistance, if I'm not curious, it's going to be much harder, one, to be effective, but two, to build a good relationship. And something that I've been leaning into lately, and this is an upcoming blog post, is this idea of repair in relationships. So sometimes we think of a good relationship as one that's absent of conflict, one that is harmonious, one that is positive, one that is, a space of mutual appreciation. What I'm learning is that good relationships, the foundation of good relationships, is not the absence of conflict or disagreement. It's how well those individuals in the relationship repair with each other following conflict and disagreement. And so if I could offer anything, get curious, get to know them, allow them to get to know you, be open and intentional about spending time investing in them as a person so that then you can coach them as an athlete. And the relationship piece, when confrontation or conflict arises, recognize it as a moment to learn something more about how to have a better relationship. And when you miss the mark with someone, it is okay. That's the starting point for being able to repair, which strengthens the relationship moving forward.
Well, Betsy, you went deep on that aspect of relationships relationships, I'm going to go real shallow here. When you're starting to build relationships with players, the three S's are really good conversation starters: sibling, sports, and school. Those are things that typically all kids are going to have. And so, if you're talking about their siblings and making jokes about being the older brother or the younger brother, and whatever your experience was in your family, and talking about school, obviously everybody's in school and there's lots to talk about there, and then finding out what they like about other sports or sports teams in your sport. Like, that may sound really simple, but those are pretty universal for all kids that you're going to start with somewhere and will lead somewhere else, where there's, threads that you can pull on as you learn more about their family or more about their history in the sport or more about their interests in school and their future goals. And so I think those are great entry points when you're starting to build relationships, just for conversation: siblings, school, and sports.
I think when we're talking about relationships, I write about this in the culture system, there's different levels. And I think oftentimes as transformational coaches, people that want to have an impact, we always want to go to the deepest level to feel like we're making an impact. We want to help them through their biggest challenges. And I think what I continuously learn is that you can be at level one where you're just coaching the athlete to their, like you're only having conversations with them really around their sport. Maybe you have some inside jokes and stuff like that, just some banter and a friendly relationship, but they may not come to you with serious issues. And yet I think that we may not feel like we're having a great impact, but many years later down the line, we realized that that was what they needed, and that was really, really helpful, right? And just our own leadership example, like we still can have a huge impact. So I think sometimes the aspect of transformational coaching, we always want to get to the most deepest level, the level three, the down to the deep. And so I think that's really important to understand that everyone needs different things based upon where they are in life. I think there's something you learn in executive coaching. I know, Betsy, you would have learned this too, which is called contracting. So when a leadership coach, an executive coach, takes on a new client to work with, taught by the ICF, the International Coaching Federation, the first call or the next call after they've said expressed interest in working with the coach is that you sit down, you go through a contract, you say, this is how many calls we're going to have, this is the length of the calls, this is what's going to cost, and these are the code of ethics that I'm going to operate under. This is how I'm going to support you. This is what I'm not going to do. Right? This is not therapy. It's not, consulting. It's this, right? So this is something I learned, and I remember just like kind of being like, it seems like a bit of a formality, and I don't really like to do that with my clients. And for a period of time, I kind of have ignored that, and then I learned like, oh man, these problems are coming up where they are expecting something out of me that I am not willing to give, or I'm expecting something from them and they're not willing to give it in this relationship, or I'm trying to challenge them and they don't want that challenge. And I'm not saying you need to sit down and sign a contract like you do in coaching, but I think the powerful thing in this executive coaching space is that we just get clear on, hey, what do you need from me? What can you expect from me, and what can I expect from you? And I think sometimes just, and if you are having a player that's going to come into your program, play for a few years, is to sit down and have a contracting conversation where you just say, hey, what do you need from me to be successful and have a great experience in this program? And then you come back and say, hey, this is what I need and I expect from you, right? And they may say, I need you to be really, helping me with X, Y, Z and be this great support. They might just say, I just need you to coach you how to kick a soccer ball and help us win a state championship or win a national championship. And that's totally okay. So I think just being clear on the terms of that relationship with your athletes can really help guide you and being the coach they need at that point.
All right, our next question here: how do you balance getting player input and just moving forward with what you believe is the right path? Right now, I have too much player input and feedback. I'm going to start on this one here before you guys jump in. This is one that, as a coach, I have become over the last 10, 15 years very reliant on the input of our captain's council. And I would argue that they have helped to both give me insight, information about what's actually happening on the team, as well as input into our decision-making process. And quite frankly, I've valued them and their perspective probably as much as another assistant coach. I do think it's a bit challenging. Sometimes it goes both ways. I think sometimes when you have players that feel overly empowered that they should have a say in everything, that can be a little bit challenging, because then you start to do something and they want to challenge it in practice, or they have a better idea. Why don't we do this? And that's not very efficient. It can waste time. It's frustrating for you as a coach, especially if you have an idea of the way things should go. At other times, on the other end of the spectrum, I've coached teams where the players just don't have a lot to say. You might ask questions and you might be looking for perspective, and they don't have ideas. They haven't thought about it, or maybe they don't have the experience to really give you an accurate way to improve something in the program. So there is a bit of a dance there and trying to figure out both what you're comfortable with as a coach. And I would really argue that the trick here is to figure out what do you need most from your players, and is it a surveillance system to understand what's really going on the team? Is it a source of information for what's going on the field during competition? Is it that you really don't get a vibe from the team, or is it you really want player input into systems and strategies? I think that's up to the coach a little bit, both balancing where they feel their expertise is and maybe where their decision making could be enhanced by the perspective from players, and then communicating that to the team. Here's what I'm very interested in getting input in, because here are the things that we've been doing it this way for a long time, and here's the reasons why. And it's not a discussion. And so, the coach obviously has the authority to set the agenda when it comes to what are we going to discuss and what are we going to welcome in for feedback from players. But those are a few things maybe I would start with there, Betsy or JP.
Yeah, and I'll offer, because you touched on it, Nate. For me, a lot of the answer to this question falls in alignment with setting expectations. And I talk about the importance with coaches all the time of co-creating with Gen Z, with our current athletes. And the first thing that has to happen, the prerequisite before co-creation, is you as a coach need to get really clear on what are your negotiables and non-negotiables. Like what will forever be off the table as coaching decisions that you and or your staff make, and then what is open for dialogue, input, etc. And then to double down on language. So when you're having conversations, to be very clear, like, I'd like to get your input for this purpose, or to be really clear in saying, this is the decision that I've made. And if you have feedback on the decision, be really clear about when they can offer that feedback and what it looks like. I want to offer something for coaches that have maybe find themselves in this particular situation where I'm getting too much input and I want to change that, but I don't know how to change that. Something that I created a few years ago that I found immensely helpful whenever you want to make a new path in any context is something that I call the 4 R's. So it's recognize, restate, restart, reinforce. Recognize, this piece is about taking ownership. Restate, this is about purpose. Restart, this is creating the new beginning. And then reinforce, this is largely about consequences or reinforcing behavior. So recognize, in this context, we might say as a coach, I recognize that up until this point, I've been very open in holding space for you to give me input on every element of our program. And that's on me. So you're going to take ownership for something that you have allowed to occur up until this point. Restate. Now you're going to go into purpose. The reality is we don't have time in our practice sessions for you to discuss with me every element of the practice plan. Or in order to be efficient, there's certain decisions I need to make and certain decisions that I'm going to ask for your input on. And moving forward, I'm going to be really clear so that you feel like you're involved in what we're doing as a program, but also there's clear boundaries and delineation between what's open for discussion and what's not. And then restart. Any language organic to you, like from now on, from here forward, starting today. So you're using language to make a differentiation in time between what was and what will be. So starting today, unless I say, I'd like your feedback back during a practice session, it's not open for discussion. But I'll be really clear in letting you know when that's welcome or how you can go about giving that. And then reinforce. And every parent knows this is the hardest part. It's not all the times that you reinforce. It's the one time that you don't, and you allow the old way of being to come in that people are going to remember. So the next time in practice, to your point, Nate, when someone's like, well, I don't think we should do this drill. We should actually be doing this drill. To be able to say, hey, I hear you, and this isn't open for discussion. If you'd like to discuss this, you can do so at this point. So reinforce the new way of being that you've set. Recognize, restate, restart, reinforce.
Yeah, I really don't have anything to add. I think you guys just absolutely nailed it right there, which is just there is a level of boundary. I think it's like you mentioned, Nate, there is a difficult balance. Some coaches don't feel like they're getting any feedback. And when that happens, well, there's things that are happening that they can't appreciate, or we could be better at these things, and you want their opinions. So, and then sometimes it feels like we open a bit, and all of a sudden we have a fire hydrant of information. It's just like, oh, how do we shut this off, right? And it's getting everywhere, and it's making a big mess. And so I think what you just shared there, Betsy, is a great framework for coaches to have that conversation with a captain, with their leadership group, for sure. Our next question that we're going to tackle is something a little bit more on the old leadership and self development space, which is Coach sent in. I'm working hard to take care of myself in season, but I'm struggling to find the optimal plan. How do I make time for it all? Now, there's some like big flags here that instantly coming up in the question itself, which is optimal and then time for it all, right? And I think we live in a world where we're getting inundated with all the things that we should do or we need to be doing to take care of ourselves when it comes to self care and making sure we're at our best, right? I mean, it's just the laundry list goes on and on and on of just all the things you have to do every morning. And I'm like, there's no way that everyone can do all the journaling, mindfulness, drink your athletic greens and eat all these different things. Like, I think at the end of the day, there's in this question, this expectation or this belief that they have to do it all and they don't. Right. And then there's optimal. Optimal, there is optimal. And I'm sure that there's, people that can optimize out there, like a very small percentage of the population that are paid to optimize and then talk about it on, as influencers. Right. And or there's scientists like Huberman that get on that podcast about the optimal sleep routine and all the things you need to do to sleep optimally. There are things to be benefited, and I think for us to learn from these things about simple things that we could do to improve things. But I don't know that there's optimal and then there's reasonable. And I think we should probably be focused more on what's reasonable. What's more reasonable at this stage of life, and the fact that we're traveling so much. We had a game last night to 11, and we didn't get home from the bus until 12 o'clock. Like, does getting up and doing your morning routine, for an hour and doing all those things, is that reasonable? I'm not sure that it is, right? Maybe you can do a modified version of it if you feel like, and it could be walking or just, parking in the farthest part from the parking lot and doing a bit of a walk around the building before you walk into the building, right? I don't know what it is, but just try to find, if you do find there's certain routines and rituals that are beneficial, physical activity, eating certain types of foods, try to just do the smallest version that you can of those things that you find to be really helpful. But just be reasonable in your expectations around what you can do, especially in season. It doesn't mean throw it out the window and just abandon it. It just means focus more on what's reasonable.
And JP, so I'm speaking at a women leaders in sport event tomorrow night, and they're asking all the speakers a leadership question. And my question that I need to answer is, what are your absolute must-dos in the AM to prepare for the day? And to your earlier point, I'm going to answer by saying, well, let's see, meditation, infrareds on a cold plunge, green smoothie. No, like my day typically starts when my 4-year-old comes in to my side of the bed and says, Mama, I'm awake. And so my must do is to say good morning to my wife. Because from the moment my 4-year-old walks in, that is the start to a day full of logistics and chaos and responsiveness and support. So the thing I need to do to prepare for my day is to acknowledge my teammate, because that is my partner in all the things that having kids who are 2 and 4 will bring into our day. And if I'm not prepared to work well with the person that is, my support system in all of this, then none of the other things really matter. They'd be nice, but start small. Like exactly what you were saying, JP. You can't make time for it all, but you can be very intentional about what are the smallest things that if I do them consistently, support my ability to give or do whatever it is that I aspire to do in this time of the season or in this period of my life. And then let that be enough. That's the other thing, is like we do the small things, but then we're like, but I should be, or no, stop shooting on yourself. Just let it be enough. Start small, let it be enough.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Something is better than nothing, right? And as we've kind of echoed throughout some of these answers here, I think figuring out what's the most important for you, if it's 15 minutes of reading or if it's working out twice a week or it's getting a smoothie in the morning, we may not be able to do all of those things every day, but just understanding which one is going to have the biggest impact for you, and then be the guy that doesn't miss a workout or the smoothie or the 2-minute meditation or whatever it might be, and just really commit to having at least one thing, I think, that is consistent, that's going to benefit your wellness during the season.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out that, if I've talked on this podcast around these healthy habits, we've had episodes around self-care and the importance of that. And I think that so we may have contributed to maybe some of the stress and anxiety this coach has been facing, which is like, how am I supposed to do it all? And I think it really is important to note that, my context is not his context or her context, right? Like, I am self-employed and don't have a class to go teach at 8 o'clock in the morning, or recruiting trips and all those types of things, right? And same for Betsy, and same for Nate. We all have different contexts, and so it's trying to find out what works for you. So turn probably down the little influencers, messages, if that's something you look at it with the Instagram, or you're a big Huberman podcaster, like those types of things. Great value in some of those things, but I think they also create anxiety for us all.
Definitely use their discount codes for the products that you want to try or consume, though. Those are always available.
Absolutely. Let's finish this last question here. What's something you have recently changed your mind or perspective on when it comes to culture and team development?
You and I have had a couple of conversations since the end of our season, just about perspective and sometimes how we don't always have a complete vision of what's happening or vision of what's happening as the head coach. And there's lots of reasons why we can get distracted or we can get fixated on one thing or another. And I think there's a conversation to be had um, with assistant coaches of like really helping the head coach to understand where those blind spots might develop, and so that they can help to coach me, so to speak, during the season, if that makes sense. And I think that goes both ways as well. This is a coach development question, right? Or can be. I think there are things that head coaches can do with a little prior understanding, perhaps, of where an assistant coach might want to grow, or what maybe their weaknesses are or their tendencies are, if they tend to, you know, whatever, they just get in their press break and that's their thing that they love, and then all of a sudden they can't do X, Y, or Z, whatever it might be. But having those conversations as a coaching staff is something that I have not done much of before, but I think would be interesting and maybe would be helpful for cultural development.
And for me, again, this is going to be a little bit through a more personal lens of a lot of the work that I do with teams throughout their season. I think up until this point, I've taken a lot of pride in being very responsive to the needs that come up every time I go out and spend time with a team, and to develop workshop or the time that we spend together around what's needed. And something that I'm going to be more intentional about with repeat teams that I support is putting things in place intentionally, even if they're not coming up on their radar at that point in the season, so that we get to have a different experience together towards the end of the season. Like doing it enough now, and I say enough meaning having a few seasons with a few specific teams instead of just being responsive, which is great, and that's all good. But really being intentional about some culture elements from my role, so that they get to experience things differently, given a history of things that have come up within the culture.
Yeah, those are some really interesting ones for me on my side of things. I think coming out of COVID, I really was focused and in coaches that could create positive experiences for their athletes. I really thought that that was really what was needed, was that we did everything within our power to create a positive experience from player 1 to player 15. And this is actually just reading Good Inside by Dr. Becky. And I really enjoy many of the things she talks about in there. But she talks about, and it's something we've discussed in the podcast before, about parents that say, I just want my kids to be happy. I think sometimes we as coaches have the same mentality. I just want my players to be happy. I want them to have had a good experience. And really, she challenges in the book that we should want not the happiness thing. That's maybe more of a byproduct, but we should want resilient kids. And it's like whatever life throws at you, resilience actually enables your ability to be happy in the hardest of times. And so I see coaches that maybe want, if we just had a winning season, then maybe my athletes would have a better experience, right? And I get that. Like, I get we want these certain outcomes. We want every player to play, every player to feel like they're valued. And yet, whatever happens in the season, I guess my greater hope is I think we need to be helping as coaches to work to create the conditions where, yeah, they can have a positive experience, but more so that they can learn to develop resilience. And that probably means engaging the community, which might mean their parents, it might mean other supports around them, from the other assistant coaches to the trainers, to the S&C, to anybody that works that has involvement with your athletes, helping to all be on the same page of how you are going to talk about what is happening within your team so that we are creating the conditions for resilience to take place. But when you have a breakdown, whether it's a parent, whether it's your S&C, whether it's your trainer that spends a lot of time with athletes that maybe are struggling with an injury, right? Whatever it be, right? We all have to be using the same language around how we handle or how we respond to that loss or that string of losses, or to you're not getting the playing time that you want, or a teammate's very difficult, or coach is very difficult. We want to have as much alignment on that. And I think if we can do that, we'll end up actually creating a lot more positive experiences for our athletes. But I think at the end of the day, we are not responsible for them just walking away and giving us a 10 out of 10 as far as a coach. Like, some people might rank us poorly. It doesn't mean we're not transformational. We might get some bad rankings. It just means that they, at that point, weren't able to have that experience that they could have rated a 10 out of 10. But they might look back on it in 4 or 5 years and go, man, coach taught me so many different things, right? And I'm really, really grateful I had him. And then some players may just think you're the worst person to ever come into their life. And that's part of it too, right? That's just part of coaching, right? We're not responsible for their happiness, but we do have a responsibility to help them to learn from the experience. All right, that wraps up our latest Ask Us Anything. If you enjoyed it, please share it with some other leaders, and be sure you are subscribed to the podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. Also, in the meantime, if you want to go deeper, if you really want to train yourself on how to create an extraordinary culture, you really might want to check out the TOC Transformational Coach and Culture Certification. Everyone that does it says, wow, this was, so much more in depth in the books. It really lays out a practical framework, and it's not just a lot of great content, but it really takes you step by step and helps you to build that plan for an exceptional culture. So check that out, as well as all our online courses at tocculture.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our weekly newsletter there as well, so you don't miss the notes to this and every episode. Thanks for listening in to the Coaching Culture Podcast.